Thank you so much, Andile, for that very kind introduction. I'm glad I had a hand in your success, which I now have the privilege to witness as I see your star continue to rise. Madam President, the current president of Abasa, I have to pay homage to. It's lovely to see you, but let me start with our hosts, starting with the chairman and of course the leadership of Ince. It's wonderful to have you all here, and I'm so pleased that you chose to have us as the Audit Office form part of this conversation this evening. I want to greet our clients, our auditees, our partners on the journey towards improving governance amongst the SOEs and public entities, but broadly, because at the end of the day, I so believe that we all want the same thing. So I stand here on behalf of 3,600 people who've chosen to serve this country by working within the National Audit Office. Of those, you've got over 700 that are chartered accountants, another almost 600 that are registered government auditors, another handful that have skills in forensics, and a larger handful with skills in information systems audit. We've got experts that deal with quantity surveying and medical equipment and engineering, all because we've understood the importance of building capability for the National Audit Office, and for us to continue to rise to the challenge of auditing all of the public sector, including the SOEs. You'll know that we've been on a journey to take over the audits of the SOEs over the last 7 or 8 years, and pretty rapid in the latter 5 years. So that's why the DBSAs are now part of our client list, and we're delighted that we're able to form part of that work. I will share some thoughts from my prepared speech, as Andile indicated, and I really would welcome a conversation with yourselves because, as I say, we all want the same thing. So we best make the time to find each other on the things that might stand in the way of us genuinely driving the improvements that I so believe we all want. So I really am so pleased to be able to engage with yourselves, being the representatives of state-owned entities, and some of the municipalities I believe might be present here on issues of good corporate governance, accountability, and transparency. Ladies and gents, we have finally had sight of the outcomes, findings, and recommendations of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, otherwise known as the Zondo Commission. And if you've burned the midnight oil on those big reports, you know that the ones that have been published so far have been able to share with us some of the insights arising from the years of testimony, the hearings that were held in the public domain, all distilled into a set of findings, recommendations, and insights on what happened during the period of state capture. And what is clear is that many public entities across all levels, national government, provincial government, municipalities, SOEs, public entities, many public institutions were primary vehicles through which a number of these nefarious activities were conducted. From the reports that have been published so far, we know too of the involvement of many private sector companies. And we also know of professionals who not only acted as participants, but as key enablers in the misuse of state funds for their own gain. Let there be no doubt of the impact of these findings and on the auditing and accounting profession. And as Andile says, I have a vested interest, a very deep passion for ensuring that the nobility of the profession is maintained. So when we read these reports, we find that many major and well-established firms have suffered severe reputational damage for their failure to act ethically and with integrity on a number of occasions. And this, which is the most troubling part, is that this happens despite professional accountants, all of them, regardless of designation, all of them, being duty-bound by the International Federation of Accountants and its code of ethics about how private sector or public sector accountants, as long as you're a professional accountant, you're enjoined by that code of ethics to conduct your work in a way that serves the public interest. Now, while many people will have their own views about the revelations of the Commission, and indeed many of the other commissions that we have witnessed over recent times, what is clear and indisputable is that there are a number of employees, leaders, managers in public entities that have done a complete injustice on their duty to serve and on their duty to act as stewards over public funds. What we saw is that far too many people who were entrusted with the mandate to serve the people of this country have simply chosen to do otherwise. They've essentially abused or failed to live up to that mandate. With a shrinking public purse, increasing dissatisfaction with the state of governance and service delivery, rising unemployment and poverty, and greater demands on the state and its entities to meet the needs of citizens, the time has come for all of us to take much greater responsibility for the mandate that we've been given to serve. Now more than ever, we must strengthen accountability, we must act ethically, and we must ensure good governance for the sake of our democracy. It is our view that we need to act as stewards and take that responsibility much more seriously, recognizing that public money is not ours to use and abuse as we please, but rather it is the money that belongs to the citizens of South Africa, all those that ought to benefit from our constitutional democracy. We must be much more prudent in how public funds are used. We must also hold each other accountable. And that's another ODT. I'm not sure if they're around, but perhaps there may be a conversation or two. So I was saying that we've got to be much more prudent in how we deal with public funds. We've got to hold each other much more accountable when there are transgressions from what has been established as the norms around how public funds are spent. And also we must act to prevent leakages before they happen. And when they do, because life is not always perfect, when they do, let's act quickly, let's collect the funds that are due back to the fiscus. So that effectively what I'm talking about is really, we've got to approach the work of running public sector institutions very differently. We're advocating as an audit office for a shift in the culture within which public institutions are run. A culture where there is a tendency towards greater accountability, greater controls, greater transparency than not. And of course, greater efficiency and effectiveness on mandate than not. And this is going to take courage, it's going to take our skills, it's also going to take us acting ethically. And somebody once said to me, you know, professionals are held up as the nobles in society. And nobles don't look at laws as the ceiling. For them, nobles, laws are the ground floor, and they operate beyond that. So the firm foundation of laws is important to uphold and protect at all times. But if we are to fulfill our duty in society to act with nobility, because we are professionals, then we must not see rules as the ceiling, but rather as the very beginning of what we do. Now, as we're all acutely aware, the already published reports of the Zondo Commission has dealt extensively with the state of SOEs in the country, and our work as an audit office confirms and correlates in many ways to what the Commission has found. We are still studying the reports in detail, for there are many and they're still coming, and we've seen a number of the recommendations that have been made to the AGSA. We're certainly humbled by the confidence that the judge has shown in us, that the Commission has shown in us, and the recognition that the Commission has placed in terms of the work that we've done so far. For us, it says that we have to continue to do what we do and get better at it and improve the impact of what it is we do, ultimately for the betterment of our country. We concur with one of the main findings of the commission. It's not the only one we concur with. I just want to draw attention to it. In that the role of leadership is crucial in strengthening systems, governance, and preventative controls in SOEs. In this regard, the report says, and I'm going to quote, "The appointment of members of boards of directors and chief executive officers for state-owned entities is a matter of serious concern. The evidence heard by the Commission regarding not just Denel, but also other SOEs has revealed that the executive very often failed to appoint the right kind of people in these positions in SOEs." Now, this quote, and I guess many other quotes that we could have looked to in this report, has a range of implications for those that run entities, those that oversee them, and those that act as the executive, as members of cabinet. For us, we see the impact in our audit reports. Our most recent findings, as highlighted in the 2021 PFMA General Report, which, as Andile said, we tabled just a few months ago, demonstrated a few key insights. One, we said that, look, SOEs are in significant financial difficulty. We witnessed entities such as SAA, SA Express, SABC, all disclosing material uncertainty on their ability to continue to operate into the future, alongside Denel, which had been in that position for a great many years. And this was described by the chair of the commission as, this is not Denel, he described Denel as having regressed from being highly regarded internationally to an empty shell in record time. We also, in our report, talked about how the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation received a disclaimer of audit opinion once again. We also saw how a number of SOEs continued to ask for and receive, in a great many instances, funding from government, utilizing funds that should have been intended primarily for service delivery. It is our view that the audit performance of SOEs is regressing. And this despite the fact that SOEs are so critical to our economic development project. And also despite the fact that SOEs have the ability to attract, to remunerate, and therefore retain top talent. So we see that also amongst SOEs, there's a very clear set of rules. In many instances, there's a very clear set of rules for everything that they do, what they ought to do, and therefore we believe that as stewards, the people who run these entities must strive to achieve better outcomes on performance and on audit. As SOEs, we believe that you have to perform well, and you must acquit yourself well in your role as custodians and stewards of the public purse. Let me share some statistics, and I'm glad the CEO of the DBSA is here because it's the only SOE that received a clean audit from us. And they tend to be able to get it right. It does. So when I was pointing at her, it was with pride to say, yes, we did call it out because it's the one SOE that continues to attain a clean audit. And what that tells us is that the things we ask for around credibility of financial information, usefulness and reliability of performance information, compliance with the rule of law, those things are not impossible. They're not only attainable, but they're desirable. Yes, we may argue about the extent of the procurement laws that should relate to them. That's one thing. But what we must never contest is the appropriateness of attaining and maintaining a clean audit, because that represents a commitment to accountability and transparency. Transnet, Land Bank, Post Office, as you might know, received a qualified audit opinion from us. Key public entities were also under financial pressure, much like the SOEs. 31% of public entities, now this is to the exclusion of SOEs, 31% of public entities had expenditure that exceeded their revenue, collectively incurring a total deficit of 7.5 billion rand. 13 public entities disclosed uncertainty about whether they will be able to continue to operate going into the future. Now, this is just the public entities, not the SOEs. Many of these public entities are key development and service delivery entities, which have also been saying for many years that they are in a vulnerable financial position, including Sandra, as well as the property management trading entity, which is attached to the Department of Public Works. And there are also a number of provincial public entities, which we sometimes easily overlook because maybe they're too distant, maybe they're too small. But we've been elevating the messages about the risks associated with poor governance, poor financial management, poor accountability in those entities, because the debts that they incur end up having to be topped up by the taxpayer. We can all agree that government and its entities simply cannot afford to lose money because of poor decision-making or neglect or corruption. However, what we're seeing is that high levels of fruitless and wasteful expenditure continue. We saw 224 auditees collectively losing a total of 1.72 billion rand in the year we audited. Now, one might say, well, of a budget of 1.5 trillion rand, why are you concerned about fruitless and wasteful expenditure of 1.72 billion rand? First of all, almost 1 billion of that 1.72 related to public entities and SOEs. And that's a concern because they shouldn't have those instances, right? They're supposed to be the type of entities that are able to attract and retain the type of skills that can put in place controls to avoid leakage, right? That's the first thing. The other reason we talk about this number is also to highlight that it's incomplete. Because when you've got a disclaimer of an audit opinion, whether you're a public entity or a municipality or an SOE, doesn't matter, but that you've got a disclaimer tells us you are not even accounting for fruitless and wasteful expenditure properly. So the number is definitely higher than what we're reporting, even so, right? And then we also noted in our report that we were worried about the SOEs, which we talked about. We were also highlighting key messages about the big service delivery departments. We call them the key service delivery departments, and I'll come back to that as well. On irregular expenditure, that's another issue which I think we'll come back to again. I know it's a contentious issue and one I'm looking forward to a bit of dialogue on. So Chair, a couple of statistics because we're accountants and I know that's going to excite a few people. So I must share. So we had 28% of the 425 auditees attaining clean audits. That's a good thing. That's a high number of clean audits in that cycle. So the PFMA cycle really being provincial government departments, national government departments and their entities. Clean audits are becoming something that happens. Okay, SOEs not so much, but the clean audits are starting to happen. Which is a good thing. Another piece of good news is that when we looked at a combination of clean audits and those that have unqualified audit opinions on financials, you get to a figure of 72% of the auditees at least publishing credible financial information. That's important to recognize because it tells you that the vast majority of auditees in the PFMA cycle can at least account for what they've done with the money allocated to them. It doesn't mean that they've won the entire battle around transparency and accountability, but it's an important step. Interestingly, yes, absolutely. And interestingly, government has a target of 75% for this in terms of unqualified with findings. So those are the ones where the financials at least are credible. Important first step, especially for the CFOs. But it means that their performance information still needs attention and compliance still needs attention. So it's something to build on. We found that 18% of our auditees, so 75 of them, received qualified audit opinions with findings. 2 had adverse disclaimers, and 18 received adverse opinions at 2, and then 18 received disclaimed audit opinions. Now, disclaimed audit opinion, and I often say this to people who don't operate much in the public sector, because we forget. You know, you're trained about a disclaimer, and then it's like a definition you see, and you must just remember it for a test, but you never engage with it unless you're working in the public sector, which we should find unacceptable. To have a disclaimer of audit opinion is inexcusable because this means you are unable to produce evidence for what you're putting in your books and what you're presenting to the auditor as financial statements. That's the first part of accountability. at least have your documentation to show what you've done with the money. We're not even asking, were you efficient in your expenditure? We're not even asking yet about, did you spend on the things you should have spent on? But just tell us what you spent on. And if you can't do that, that is a significant breach in terms of you acting as a steward over public funds. When we finished these audits, there were at least 23 audits that were outstanding. And not outstanding in that they were exemplary, but outstanding in that they were incomplete. Now, I must explain. And this was primarily due to financials that were late or that were outstanding, in that they'd not been submitted at all. Now, we spent quite a bit of time when we shared the report publicly talking about the entities where this was a feature. Because the PFMA is very clear. If you are in the PFMA cycle, your year end is end of March, end of May, you submit financials for audit, and then it says Auditor General, audit and finish by the end of July, so that report, your audit report, can form part of an annual report that reaches Parliament in September. That way, Parliament can start its oversight processes. That's how the system is designed. Now, when somebody does not submit financials, that's a problem, because accountability has been breached. If somebody submits financials late, that's equally a problem, because why on earth are you submitting financials late? Because you've had months and months and months to actually get your act together, and even when the year ended, you still had another 2 months, okay? Then there are those who fight with us, tooth and nail, in the audit process. And I'm not suggesting that we are perfect. And I'm also not suggesting that we should not be challenged. Quite the contrary. I think that when a CFO or a board or a CEO take an active interest in what goes into the audit report, that is what we want to encourage. You want to see that, right? I mean, imagine when you don't know, you audit and nobody cares, you give a disclaimer, no one cares. I mean, that's disheartening for everyone. Much better if a professional on the other side of the table engages you properly. And because they care about the stuff. So I'm happy with that. And in fact, I say to my teams, it makes us sharper. And we must welcome it. What we worry about is when people want to intimidate, insist on continuing to re-audit things 5 times, 6 times, until they get a better audit outcome than what they deserve. When you delay the accountability process in that way, it says a great deal about your commitment, your professionalism, your ethical conduct, and your tendency towards accountability and transparency. It would seem that far too many entities have become too comfortable with their audit reports never reaching Parliament on time, so they're never subjected to the accountability process. And I think as citizens, we should be worried about it. Importantly, as those of us who are professionals, who have an ability to rise up to, we should be even more concerned. Andile, as you know, irregular expenditure remains high. It's a feature that comes out of the non-compliances because the compliance culture, disciplines, monitoring controls are not yet there. And as a result, you end up with irregular expenditure. The number is always high. It reaches the headlines. And then we forget about it. For us, the big story here is about the non-compliances that are repetitive and what it tells us. It's not so much about how big is the number, but what does it tell us about the journey we are on in building strong systems where preventative controls are the order of the day, where there's effective monitoring and oversight in terms of ensuring that these systems deliver as we have designed them, where there is internal audit that's effective, where there's an audit committee that adds value into the system, so that as a CEO, you have some sense of what's happening in your environment. The audit process by the AG should not surprise you. For us, these non-compliances and the fact that they remain so high continue to be a caution that we have not yet invested in those critical controls and disciplines. So beyond the headline about the scale of irregular expenditure, our concern is really about that. Because in any event, the number of irregular expenditure, we keep telling you guys, as high as it might be, as upsetting as it might be, it's also not complete, because almost a third of the auditees are qualified on the completeness of the irregular expenditure. It's also, we are always at pains to say, irregular expenditure does not necessarily say that there has been corruption. Someone must go and figure that out. That you have non-compliance in your environment should worry you as the CFO, as the CEO, as the board, more than the AG. And you should be the very first one to figure out what is it and what is it not. Not to ask the AG when we table our report. You should be the one to say, there's this non-compliance. Was money lost? Let me recover it. Is this contract unlawful? Let me cancel it. Is there an internal controls problem in my environment? Let me fix it. Is it a training issue amongst my people? Let me sort that out. Is it a discipline issue? Let me deal with it. That's what the framework is designed to do. AG flags, you respond as the people entrusted with managing public funds. When I talked about the key service delivery departments, so we look at health, education, public works, human settlements, and we look at all the 9 provincial departments and the national departments. So you're looking at a total of 40 auditees. And what we found was, of all of them, and together they carry the biggest part of the budget, right? For obvious reasons, because of what they mandated to do. Only 2 had clean audits. One might say, well, it's improper to keep hoping that the Department of Health, with its complexities in the provincial domain, should not get a clean audit. Well, here's the thing. The Western Cape has a clean audit and has been able to maintain it over many years. So again, just like the DBSA story, it tells us that the things we're insisting upon are not only desirable, but they're also attainable. So it can happen, and it should happen. We should certainly insist on it. I'm going towards the end of my talk because I don't want to talk for too long. The big story we shared when we did this audit report, we said there's an improving trend. More clean audits, more unqualified plus clean in that you've got good published financial statements. We're still worried about compliance. We're still worried about performance information. You've got to sort out SOEs, and you've got to sort out the key service delivery departments. But on the whole, there has been improvement. And I think that's important for us to note and for us to yes, acknowledge and absolutely build on it. My dear colleagues, and I say this because, as I said, we are part of the same system, and in many ways we want the same thing, regardless of where we sit. As auditors, as accountants, as supply chain experts, as CEOs, as board members, and even as service providers who happen to have an interest in the ongoing improvement in accountability and transparency. All of us want the same thing. So I firmly believe that we must invest in ensuring that we have the capability to do what's required, uphold and insist upon the right ethical posture that's going to get us there, and to hold each other accountable to that. If you look at where we are in the world, and especially in this country, citizens deserve that. And I think they have every right to expect better of those of us who are professionals. Andile, the law was amended in 2019 to give the AG more powers. And so people say, but the AG, you've got teeth. How can you come and tell us about irregular expenditure? Sort it out. And we're always at pains to say, this instrument is an important one because it can help us to complement improvements in the accountability mechanisms. The design of it does not take away the responsibility of those who are appointed to run state institutions. Ours is to enforce action. If the accounting officer fails to invest irregular expenditure, we will refer the matter for investigation because they failed. And if the accounting officer once again fails to act on the outcomes of an investigation, we will enforce it by giving us stronger recommendations with timelines. If they still fail to act, then we will escalate the issue towards taking binding remedial action. And if they still fail to act on that, then we'll issue a certificate of debt, which is in the name of the person who failed to execute on their duties. So I tell this story to highlight that you'll never see the AG putting anyone in jail. That's not our function. And neither should it be. I also tell this to point out something quite important. If you should see the AG issuing a certificate of debt, and we will do it if we have to. If you should see it happen, recognize that accounting officer has failed numerous times. You saw me counting. And recognize that the people who should be supervising that DG, that MM, that HOD, that board equally have failed. And guess what? The people who have been elected to oversee how public institutions run would have had multiple opportunities to act. So when you see the AG issuing a certificate of debt, see it for what it is. It's once again, beyond the headline, it's once again an indication of failure in the system, and we must call it out for what it is. So we won't hesitate to issue it if we have to, but let's recognize what it is. Fortunately, we've been implementing this for three years now. We've been doing it systematically in a phased approach. We're seeing that when we issue MI notifications, that's the material irregularity, much like a reportable irregularity from the private sector. When we issue these MIs, most accounting officers are responsive. Most boards are responsive. There are a few who aren't, and then we're escalating the matter, and they're in different phases of being dealt with. But most are responding, which says to us that the ability and the tendency and the willingness to respond is there. We just have to find a way to tap into it and get people to do the right thing in a way that's consistent with their duties. If need be, I'm happy to share some detail on it, but I want to round off by saying I'd like to challenge all of us today to be part of the change of driving a different culture in the public institutions where we work. Let's start ensuring that we turn this thing towards greater accountability, greater transparency, and greater effectiveness. I sometimes worry when people say, well, you know, we want service delivery, so we can't be worried about clean audit. No. Section 195 of the Constitution is patently clear. You've got to be efficient and effective in your mandate, and you must be transparent and accountable. You don't get to choose. You got to do both. You're a public institution. So here's the thing, colleagues. The audit work, by its very nature, can only be retrospective. We can only act once the transaction has happened. In many ways, you are preparing for year end in a couple of weeks. In May, we'll be coming to audit you. We're busy planning, we're busy talking to you, we're busy starting to do the interims. Many of the transactions that will be subjected to our audit have happened already. There's probably little we can do about that. Let's get the audit process done, and we continue to systematically fix the things that have gone wrong in the previous financial year. We know that building strong, predictable systems takes time. You're not going to get a clean audit and maintain it overnight. The DBSA will tell you it's hard to get a clean audit, probably more difficult to maintain it. And so you've got to continue to invest in your systems, in your disciplines. You've got to make sure things are functioning at senior management level, with your internal audit, with your audit committee, right throughout the year, and not just wait for the audit process. So I want to wish you well as you prepare your financials for audit. I want to wish you well in your audit processes. Our teams are great. The thing about audit is that it's not pleasant. No one likes an audit. It's like, you know, it's not pleasant for anybody. By its very nature, it is unpleasant. But it becomes just that much more difficult when we fight about the wrong things, when we forget that actually we all want the same thing. So I would want to encourage you to remember that we all want the same things. When we falter, hold us accountable. Similarly, when you falter, we'll hold you accountable, because I fundamentally believe if we all have the same posture of wanting to ensure that the jobs we do, regardless of where we are charged to do them, those jobs are about building stronger public institutions rather than not. So thank you very much for listening to me. I look forward to the engagement.